Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I'm super excited to have you on. And in prep for this episode, obviously you and I talked, and I feel like our conversation, it was almost that like the conversation could have been a podcast interview in and of itself. But I want to give you the floor and give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to my audience.
Yeah, Zach, it's so great to, come on your podcast. And like you said, this tends to be, I think when you connect, and I loved like having, the first conversation with you, just, chatting about doing this together. We connected on so many things, and you almost end up talking so deeply about things that it, could have almost been the podcast recording. So, but it's like, that's what I love. I love connecting with people like you and having these conversations. And, yeah, for me, I guess, my story, I've been, I'll try and give the abbreviated version, but, I've been in the mental health space for 12 years now. Fell into it through a number of things, but really, since I was a little kid, I had issues with overthinking and anxiety, and a whole range of different things going on, and that really manifested over time into me going off the rails, developing addictive behavior patterns, having a really difficult time when I finished at school because I wanted to be a professional athlete, and that had fallen apart. And I was, obsessing about it, training 6 hours a day as a 12-year-old kid, and just training myself into the ground and developing injuries and tying my identity to it. And that led to, basically just going off the rails, finishing at school, dropping out of university, and using alcohol to cope, and getting in, life-threatening situations on often a, nightly basis. And I had grown up in a well-known family. My dad was the premier of Victoria. So in America, that's the equivalent of like the, governor of California or that kind of thing. And, that was really difficult. And then things were getting publicized, and I had a car crash that became the biggest news story in Australia. And it really led me, I was going really downhill. And eventually, fortunately, I hit such rock bottom that I had to get help, and gradually started to piece things together. And through that process, was wound up being asked to go on Dancing with the Stars in Australia, and reluctantly did it. And I did it because you got to work with a charity. So I wanted to raise awareness and money for mental health. And that really was the catalyst for the work that I've been doing. I went on it, started sharing my story, started getting asked to talk at schools and in companies, and just did it for free for a long time. And then that turned into a career where, I went from this kid where I was, too shy and, low in self-esteem to look someone in the eyes and talk to them, to then being, back at university, having to talk in front of 5 people and trying to pull out of the course because I, was so afraid of public speaking, and I'd be vomiting before I'd go and do it. And before I did it, I'd be writing it out word for word on a sheet of paper, and, just absolutely in turmoil about it. And then actually having a career as a public speaker and, growing from there, and, doing other things. I pursued a career in acting, which I still, am very actively involved in, and a number of other things. But, there's so many lessons I learned through it, but, that we'll discuss. But that one of the main ones was, we don't have to listen to everything our mind tells us. And and you're listening to your gut, and that everyone can do anything they want to put, if they put their mind to it, but you've got to put in the work, and you've got to believe in yourself, and you've got to, have support systems, and, all sorts of things. So it's, anyway, I'm sure we'll delve into all these topics. And sorry if I'm rambling. It's always hard to give the quick version of that story, but that's the sort of most abbreviated version I can put together.
Yeah, no. And I think that that's important what you pointed out there at the end, which is not believing every thought that your brain tells you. And that's one of, like, for me in my journey, that's been one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn. And I want to dive into that. I'm curious, do you feel that from a young age, you were an anxious an overthinker. What age do you think that roughly started?
Oh God, as far back as I can remember, like I
Really?
would say, I remember probably being like that when I was, 5 years old, 6 years old.
Oh,
But
wow.
literally
Really
as
young.
long, as far back as I can remember. I was also, naturally a very rebellious, rule
Mm,
breaking, thought differently, very
yeah.
overly active imagination,
Yep.
wanting to cause, didn't know where to put my energy and thoughts, endless energy, getting into trouble. Like I'd be, 5, 6 year old kid and I'd be with my mum in a park and I'd be climbing trees, to the top of the tree and hanging off with one arm and, just trying to like attention seeking because I just had this, so much energy, so much going through me. But I think it was a combination of, overthinking and, knowing that I saw the world so differently than the conventional way of looking at it, but not having the guidance on, how do I utilize that? How do I learn to understand, how my mind works?
Can you tell me more about that? When you say knowing that you saw the world differently, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is and to this day, I cannot operate if I'm put in a box, if
Mm,
if I have rules around me, if I have, set guidelines. It's not logical to me. If people are saying, okay, at school, these are the hours you have to be here. This is how you have to do this task. This is how you learn. It's like, well, I didn't learn like that. And I found that really hard. And the only way I could do it is if I found other ways to get through it, which I did in a clumsy way, but was able to do it.
mm-hmm.
And then as I've gotten older and, pursued the career path that I've gone down, I've just gone about it completely differently and, have never had a full-time job and not that I'm against that, and I think and everyone's different. There's no right or wrong. But for me, I think when I was younger, when I was first finished at school, people told me and I felt like I didn't have enough of a work ethic because I'd be trying to, do different things. Or when I tried to get a job, I just couldn't do it because I felt like I was suffocating and I had no interest in it. And I just could not bring myself to, turn up at a set time and do a thing that I didn't see as being part of the path that I wanted to go down. But then when I did find things I wanted to do, I worked harder than anyone. I'd be working, if anything, and to this day again, too much. I have to switch off sometimes. So again, I think the message out of that is just being able to, take the time to understand yourself first before you decide, what you want to really dive into. And I feel like we get taught the wrong way around. We go to school, then you go to college, university, and then you're meant to get a job, raise a family, etc.
Yeah.
Before having any time to actually sit there and work on yourself and, understand yourself and, through that probably finding what you really want to do. And then that's why people have a midlife crisis or get into trouble or have mental health problems or all these different things that happen. So I think it's just we're taught the wrong way.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because my wife says I need to stop saying this, but I always joke that I'm unemployable, and I don't mean that in I'm like some bully in the workplace or something like that. What I mean is it's always been really, really difficult, and this goes all the way back to school for me. It was always so difficult for me to play inside of the box, like what you're talking about, to stay inside of the lines. Not that I need to like break rules and be rebellious just for like a thrill of it. It's just for me, I was always like, this isn't like, there were certain subjects that were really interesting to me in school. And in all of those classes, I always got A's.
Yeah.
Effortlessly. And it was because it was classes too that I think, they weren't the ones that like, it wasn't like math and science. And I was interested in science and I did well in science, but math it never really interested me that much. And there was other subjects, history, English, writing, some of the more creative classes that I really enjoyed, the business and entrepreneurial classes that I got into later on in life. Like those were the ones that were interesting to me, and everything else, I was like, this is just pointless.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't get excited for it. How does somebody start to, because I think you bring up a good point. I mean, we do school, And then either you go right into working or you go on to university, then you start a job, and then it's, meet the person you're going to spend your life with, get the house, blah, blah, blah. How does somebody start to work on figuring out who they are?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because it's different for every individual. And I think the first step is really just you've got to take that, you just got to start questioning things and thinking, hang on, am I making this decision because it's something I want to do and I believe in, or is it because my teacher told me I should? Is it because my parents said that I should do it? Is it because just in general, society or, we're meant to do these things? Whoever the hell decided these rules of what we're meant to do, I'm listening to all these things. Or is it because I actually want to do it? And if it is because I'm being told to do it, okay, then why am I feeling the need to do it? And what are the things that I would maybe rather look into? And so I think it's really being able to tap into, I'm a big believer, and I think anyone listening can probably relate to this, where your gut always tells you the right answer. You sort of, that feeling you get where you're about to make, and I had this happen last week, actually. I had a huge decision to make, and I was about to go and do it, and my gut was just, something was wrong. And then I had to say no in the end because I've just learnt to listen to it. But in the past, I have gone against my gut many times, and it just, everything felt wrong, and normally it doesn't work out. And even if it does, it just, doesn't feel like the right thing because it's not what you wanted. So I think really, trusting yourself. And I think, again, we don't get built up enough to learn that. We get told, no, don't question things. Don't go against what you're told. Do this, blah, blah, blah. So it is tricky because it's sort of something that, some people have more innate capability to sort of do in that, being a leader and questioning things. And some people probably need nurturing, and there's no, again, right or wrong. But that would be the step, taking that initiative, because until the systems change, until schooling nurtures more of that, it is going to be up to, us having these kind of conversations, mainstream education about it, sort of all of, as much information as we can to empower individuals to learn to start questioning things.
How do you start to trust your gut? Because I love that advice, but for me, I feel like that's still something I'm trying to develop.
Yeah, same with me. I think it's a lifelong thing. And I think there's no endpoint to it, but I think it's really, I think there's no alternative for life experience. So I think you can intellectually understand something, but you're not going to be able to really, listen to your gut or trust things until you've had enough experiences. So, for me, if I look back to when I was in my early 20s and thought I was going to take over the world, I was trying to, start up 3 companies at once. And I remember, I think back now to advice my dad was giving me, and I was, getting infuriated, saying, fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to take over the world.
Classic.
Yeah, exactly. We can all relate to it.
And
now I look back and I just cringe, and I'm like, oh my God, imagine what my dad was like thinking, hearing this, and how arrogant was I, being this kid with literally no life experience, no experience doing any of these things, just saying that, no, I know better, and I'm going to not even work that hard, and it's all going to work for me. So the best thing that ever happened to me, and I think it's just so important, and I think this is another huge problem with the world we live in, is I had a pretty sheltered upbringing, and I was afraid of my own shadow when I was, 20 years old. And then I just had event after event, depression, public, a huge public collapse of my, whole life. And I hit rock bottom. And then when I tried to get out of it, I kept failing, and I was trying things and I failed, and I built more resilience, and I kept going, and I failed, and I fell on my face, and I made a fool of myself, and I kept pushing. And that's been the best thing that I could have ever done. That's where the learning comes from. And that's how I learned to, trust my gut more or not. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to just stop thinking so much, stop trying to find, there's no perfect anyway, just go and fail at stuff. Because I look at failing as not failing, it's learning. You're actually better off if you fail a lot than getting your own way all the time, because that's where you're going to grow. You're not going to grow if you just, everything always goes your way. And I think, as I was saying before, the point of, that being a problem now, we live in this sheltered world now where, we're living through screens. We want instant gratification. We, like through social media, there's all these echo chambers where people don't want to move out of their comfort zone. They just want to associate with people that have the same viewpoint as them. You're not going to grow if you do that. So it's so important that we just go and, try and make a fool of yourself. Like I do improv class every Friday night, and I do it because you can't think. You're standing up there and you got to just make up a scenario on the spot. If you don't, then you're going to even be more embarrassed. So it's just teaches me to, stay living out of my comfort zone and, not have to have all the answers, which, I fall in and out of that. But I think it's so important.
Yeah, not the need to not have all the answers, I think, is a big one. It's tough to learn. I'll say it's funny that you bring that up, because I think it's one of the gifts and the curse of being a young person is, and when I mean, we're similar in age, but like when you're early 20s is what I mean, like 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, like early 20s, I feel like a lot of young 20 somethings have that, like, I'm going to conquer the world mentality. And then you get into the real world. And for a lot of people, it just slowly starts to get chipped away, because you start to realize that it's so difficult to carve out your own path or to change the world that you thought you were going to do when you were younger. I'm curious, what was the advice? Like, what were you saying to your dad, and what was the advice that he was trying to give you?
Yeah, no, I'll answer that. And just quickly to your point there, I think that is such a good point, because I think the most, the hardest thing to do, and the people that, end up having the most success and are just the most interesting people are the ones that can go through that and have that chipped away, and then still through all of that maintain that, childlike sort of enthusiasm and, outlook on the world. I think if you can do that, that's, you can't go wrong. But it's so hard to do, because, and it breaks my heart, because I've seen, and that's why I want to do the mental health work and talk about this stuff, because I can see, one or two different events happened in my life, and I probably would not have gone on the path I'm going down, because I was really going, full steam the other way. And I could have just completely broken to the point where I never actually went down this path. And I've seen it with so many people, friends that are actors that have so much talent and have had so much success in the past, that get to a point where, they can't make ends meet, and they quit and they go and conform, and they're unhappy. It's like, you've got to, I think age really doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember I had a friend, he's very happy with what he's doing now. So he's, I guess, maybe a little different from some of your actor friends. But this did spark this in my head, because he's not in acting anymore, but right out of school, he moved to LA to pursue acting. And I remember when he decided he was going to move back to the Bay Area to get into tech and pursue that path. I remember just asking him, like, are you sad? Like, how do you feel about it? And he just told me, he was like, Zach, it's just so many no's. Like, it's just so many no's. And I think when you're in school and then you're in college or university, or even if you go into the real world, maybe not. Maybe if you stay in the sheltered environment, let's start there. In school, there's sort of a laid out path, and as long as you follow it and sort of, you study and you do the things, like, you're gonna be fine, more or less. That's my belief. But I think once you get into the real world and you start hearing no's, that's the chip. That's the chip away. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't make a pivot, because my friend made a pivot, and I genuinely believe that he's happier for it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that just goes to show that acting sounded more fun than the process wasn't fun to him,
Yeah.
Which is fine too. But I do think there's something to be said about the word no. And to your point, I think the people that stick with some of these more challenging paths, paths we're on, actors, comedians, business leaders, politicians, etc., like, I think that they learn how to create a different relationship with no, and still, to your point, maintain some of that childlike excitement, because there are so many bumps and bruises along the way on this path. And like, it just, if there's not something deeper there, and that's why I think you talk about your story. I've noticed this a lot with people that I interview. I feel like people that have more of that like conviction are the ones that have been deep down dark, seen the darkest side of themselves, experience that, and it almost builds some sort of resiliency that makes these sort of paths in life a little bit, I don't know if easier is the word, but just you're able to get through it.
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, and I agree with what you're saying as well about the other part of, your friend who is an actor and he's happier now. And, I'm definitely not saying that you should just stick to something against, all logic, but, and sometimes we do have to pivot, but I think keeping that sort of that, enthusiasm, childlike, mentality, that passion, I guess, for life and what you're doing is really hard to keep. And I agree. I think having to, learn, and whatever you're doing, we need to learn to be able to look at people saying no, not as a personal attack on us, or not saying that we're not worthy. It's just not the right thing. And, each no is actually leading to you getting closer to finding something that is going to be better for you. And, there's learning in it. So I think it's just part of that process. And it is really like I had to take a break from acting for the last year, and I'm getting back into it now and loving it because I've found a different approach. But I got to a point where I got into it initially, just fell in love with it. It, changed my life. I loved the creative outlet. Then I got on a show in Australia. Then I started auditioning a lot overseas. And then I got to a point where I was starting to hate it because I was like, I'm not even enjoying the process of this anymore. I just want to get the work. And everyone's saying no. And then I stopped, and now I've just reframed it to, I just want to do it for the sake of doing it. And whether I get given a job or not, that doesn't matter because I can still do it. Because it's sort of like saying, I don't want to go to the gym or go for a run or go and, go play basketball with my friend unless it means unless I can become an Olympic athlete or win, some event. It's like, well, sure, if you're training for that, that can be the goal, but you can still actually go and do the thing. Yeah. And that's what I learned with acting. It's like, great, hopefully I get all the long-term things, but I can do it. I can go to improv class. I can film scenes with other actors. I can, go and do a play. I can go and make my own short film or whatever. You're still doing it. So I think that really helped. And I do, with what you said, I really agree that the people that have hit rock bottom, been through those dark times, are the ones who develop the most resilience. And I think, again, it can go either way. You can hit that rock bottom and you can stay there, or you can conform, or you can really, use it to just completely, look deep into your soul and transform yourself, and then just, never look back. And I think, not everyone has to hit complete rock bottom, but I think everyone should go through hardship, and we're trying too hard to protect ourselves from having those experiences. And, they're the formative experiences that are going to, lead you closer to being your true self and finding peace, finding happiness.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hardship is, nobody wants to feel pain. I mean, that's our brain's sort of natural state, is to help us avoid feeling discomfort and pain. But it is where I think a large part of the growth takes place. So I think that's a really good point. You said that, so I want to get to the part about not believing your thoughts, because I think that's important, but I want to set that question up by asking you this. You said that you grew up sort of sheltered. How much of an impact, and how many of these narratives that you told yourself, have you tracked back or correlated to your dad being like a high profile person in Australia?
The way I look at that is everything that I experienced and how I am would have probably happened anyway.
Okay.
But I think it happened on, it would have probably happened on a sort of lower level. So because of the famous father and, again, the combination of because I've got amazing parents and they, have always done their best. And, we might have not seen eye to eye, but they've done everything they could in their power to do their best job. But I think the combination of my personality being so incredibly ambitious, having frustrations about not knowing how to, find my place in the world, with this famous father, me being the oldest kid, since, from the age of 12 till my early 20s, everyone in the state of Victoria that I grew up in, knowing who our family was, referring to me, as the son of this person, it just added so much fuel to the fire of me being like, well, fuck you, fuck all of this. I'm not the son of this person. My name is Nick. And what do I need to do for you to see me as Nick? I've got to do something even bigger than my father. So, and I was trying to become an Olympic athlete, trained myself to such a degree that, I stunted my physical development and, my body broke down and I couldn't keep going. Then when I was on all these TV shows, I wanted to be famous. And I was like, how do I get really famous? And I was making bad decisions. But luckily that actually naively led me to acting, because I initially thought, okay, I'm on TV. Maybe if I become a famous actor, that's how I can get more attention. And, I started acting class and I saw, oh, this is actually pretty hard. And, there's a lot that goes into it. And then fortunately actually fell in love with it and stopped caring about that stuff, once I found more meaning. But, it really did add so much fuel to it, because I, just wanted to prove to people that I'm my own person, and felt like I had to. And I think it's a universal theme on certain levels. I think everyone on some, or not everyone, but a lot of people on some level have that with, a parent, where they feel like this pressure to, live up to what the parents have achieved.
Yeah. Or even just the expectation to live up to the parents' expectation. Like they feel this pressure to like impress their parents or their friends or whoever it might be. So I think that's why I wanted to ask that, because I think that that's really relatable. And I can imagine the pressure build up and the frustration of just wanting to be your own person, and going down all of these different paths to almost try to validate yourself with other people, which I think is really, really relatable. What were the belief systems that you were believing back then that you had to start challenging?
Yeah, it's a good question. The belief systems were, I'm not enough unless I outdo my father. That was the biggest one, which is just kind of
huge. No, but that's so big for people to hear, though.
Yeah.
I'm not enough unless I outdo my father, because also people have the I'm not enough unless statements running in their head all the time. It's just fill in the blank on the back end on what they have to do to prove that they're enough.
Exactly. So, that was the big one. And, when you think about it, it's not that logical, because everything's ambiguous anyway. Like, how do you prove that one thing's bigger than the other? Or, what does it mean? And in my mind, it was one of two things. It was, I either need to become the biggest movie star in Australia.
Yep.
So I can be like, you know what? Yeah, you're big in Australia, but no one really, even outside of Victoria, knows about this. But me, on the other hand, I've become this huge actor and everyone in the whole world knows who I am. That's bigger.
Yep.
It was sort of in my mind that, or going down a political path and trying to become like prime minister would be the other thing, but which it's just crazy sort of things to even think about. But, you have these thoughts going through your head, and it's not logical, but it was very, very, very strong and controlling a lot of my emotion and my decision-making.
Yeah. So it was controlling your behaviors and sort of the different paths that you were taking. When did you, because I feel like sometimes these unhelpful belief systems run we're aware of them and they run our life, but we don't realize that maybe they're not necessarily healthy or helpful. When did you become aware of that? Like, when did you first notice, like, me wanting to be the biggest movie star in the world might not be what's actually best for me?
Yeah. That's a good question as well. I think deep down, I knew the whole time it was the wrong thinking, but like you're saying, it was sort of too strong to, to sort of even address. So when it started to change was when I really had developed more self-love and went through that process of, going from the story I said earlier where I was saying, to my dad, oh no, I'm going to take over the world, whatever. And, not being so naive and arrogant, to then falling on my face, to then, trying different things to the point where in my mid-20s, I got to a point, actually, no, it probably wasn't until 26, 27, I got to a point where and to this day, it's, I'm 35 now and it's the same thing. I'd identified, okay, through all of this, there's one key thing I want to dedicate the rest of my life to, and that's helping in mental health. Mm. And by that point, I had already for 5 years been doing it. And the other thing I want to do is I want to, for the rest of my life, just pursue this career in acting, and I want to, grow and become as good as I can. Mm. And I just decided those two things, I'd become so clear. And regardless of how those two things form, whether that's having a conversation with you right now, whether it's, starting a initiative in mental health that helps, 10 million people, whether it's helping one person, who cares? As long as I'm doing what I can with what I have available to me to help. And then the same as the acting, how can I, of course, I want the end goal of like actually having this huge film career, becoming, as big as I can and working with all the best directors and whatever. But as long as I can be true to myself and just get as good as I can at it, that's all I want to do. And, when I reached that point, a lot of that stuff faded away. But having said that, I'd be lying. And I think I'll have this my entire life where there is still that, there's always going to be a part of it that is in my mind. There's always going to be a part of me.
Me too.
Wanting, yeah. And I think the realization is that's okay. Like we have to accept that we can keep growing, and it might always be there to a degree, but you can evolve to a point where you can be the one making the decision whether you want to let that control you or not.
Yeah. And I think the word that comes to mind for me is ego. And I have my own version of that too. Like when your goal is to conquer the world and be the biggest in this, or be the biggest in that, or be the best at this, or I get it, because I've been there myself. So I want to say that I completely relate to that.
Yeah.
But it's ego. It's not about, when those are your goals, it's not about other people. And it's sort of empty in that sense. And it sounds to me like the transition you made was more into falling in love with the process. It doesn't change that it still might be there in the background. And that's definitely the case for me. And I'm sure that's the case with other people as well. But the only piece that I've been able to find to counter that is grounding myself and reminding myself about just being in the process. Like when you talk about just wanting to do something for life and just consistently get better at it, that is the process versus the product of, I have to be the biggest in the world, I have to do this, I have to do that. So I think that's a really good point. I guess as you started to cultivate self-love, how did you start to challenge these belief systems?
Like a big part of it's what you just said there. Like, and this is a continual back and forth process for me. And it happened, in the last 12 months as well, where, when I fell out of the acting, and I sort of, because I've had so many big things happening in my life, I sort of fell a little bit back into, that thinking of, I just need all these bigger things to happen so I can then have permission again to go back to acting, because I've got so much stress with, I was launching my book and running my podcast, running my business, raising money for it, living in New York. I don't have time to, I've got to get so much success in all this stuff. Then I can have permission to go into acting. And then I sort of got to a point, it was only, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, where I was reassessing everything. And I was like, actually, you know what? Like, I'm not really feeling as happy as I should, or as grounded, and because I've fallen out of the, doing that. And I just went back to basics, and I'm going to still do everything I can for all the business stuff and all the things I'm trying to, achieve to service them, and, but just go back to process. And every day, what are the things I can do, and where am I going to block out time to also get back into the process of the acting stuff and that kind of thing. So I think it's the biggest thing. And I think it's something that we all struggle with because and it's not our fault, we've been conditioned to feel like we need to become something to be worthy, or that, happiness is at this end destination when we finally achieve whatever it is. And it's a complete lie. If we can't be happy right now, we're never going to be happy. And if you truly do actually love what you're doing, then you should be able to enjoy the process to a degree, because obviously there's some things that we do that no matter what you're doing, it's not going to be enjoyable, but the core process it's not going to be different. And again, using the acting analogy, the actual craft of acting, if I'm like with one other acting friend in my apartment just recording a scene, compared to being on a set with a crew of 1,000 people and it's $100 million production, and I'm getting filmed performing a scene with one other actor on that production, the actual experience, the actual thing that I'm doing is still the same thing. So then, it's changing that mindset of I'm already doing it. And the ironic thing is, like, when you do actually properly embrace being in the process, you're much more likely to get, the lofty goals than if you just project all the time, because projecting stops you from even doing the work. So then you just, you go around in a circle. So it's kind of ironic and weird, but it is how it works.
Is that like when you're daydreaming about what your ideal situation is? Yeah. Like becoming the biggest actor of all time, or the best politician, or the best podcaster in the world. That's the projecting, right?
Absolutely. The project, which, and I think some of it's healthy, to think about and have that as maybe a goal. But, I've had a tendency definitely to sit in that way too much and become very impatient and get very frustrated that, I can't control outcomes to enough of a degree to force these things into reality. So it's only, the times I feel at peace is when I go back to how I'm sort of going about things now of, I'm just going to follow the process and just give that everything, and whatever happens. And, if it goes no further than this, who cares? I can be actually proud of what I'm doing and know that I've done it with integrity, and, why does it matter at the end of the day?
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with that so much. And because I was going to say, like, for me, and I feel guilty about this because I sometimes absolutely love the process, and sometimes I get burnt out by the process. Yeah. And I will say, I think I'm still trying to differentiate at times whether that is, am I projecting? And because my reality doesn't match what I'm projecting, I'm feeling these emotions, or I'm still like in my life trying to sort that. How much of this is like the fact that I live with OCD and like I have to manage my brain health on a daily basis? How much of this is projecting? How much of this is burnout? Because like when I think about my life, this is what I want to be doing. I mean, there's literally nothing else that I want to do. Trying to adjust my mic here. There's nothing else that I want to do. But it is interesting that you say that, because sometimes when I'm not completely in love with the process, I feel guilty because I feel bad. I'm like, if you really loved this, then you would be super happy in just doing the process of the thing. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that. I mean, how does somebody detach from projecting? How do they start to let go of that and fall in love with the process? And then how do you manage guilt along the way?
Yeah, no, and I totally, agree with what you're saying there. And I think the thing is, there's one thing of like trying to limit the projecting and not be, because that'll just lead to overwhelm and inaction, and, you don't do anything. And if you're living in that state, which a lot of us do. So we've got to be aware of that and then go back to, okay, great, but I want to achieve all these things. What do I need to do right now? And, I think and then it goes back to the process. But I think the other part of it is, I think it's a bit of a myth that we get told and we think if we pursue our passion that we're just going to love it all the time, because there's one thing doing something that we're passionate about and it's just a hobby. If you love, I don't know, playing sport or going hiking or something, it's going to be just an enjoyable thing. There's no pressure on it. You're going and doing it just for the fun of it. If you turn that into an actual profession, then there's going to be so many daily things that become procedural and take a lot of the joy out of it that are going to need to be done to get there. So you're still going to enjoy, like, then when you're actually outperforming, you're enjoying the, I guess using the podcast is a good example, because I know for me, what I love, and if I can ever get successful enough, if I had teams of people around me organizing all of the logistics, et cetera, and all I had to do every day is, turn up and prepare for an interview, just interview someone and then go on a stage and do a talk, turn up and do an acting role, then I would be loving the majority of the process. But until you get to that point, we're going to have to do the logistics, for the podcast. I don't know about you, but for me, I'm having to, go on Instagram and just hustle and message, guests. I'm having to, organize in the calendar when I'm going to record them, prepare for the interviews, record the interviews, edit the interviews, promote the interviews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So out of all of those activities, there's only one part I actually really am passionate about, and that's doing what we're doing right now, sitting there and talking. So I think it's reminding yourself that you shouldn't feel guilt about it. You should be feeling, you know what, there's going to be things about this that I don't enjoy, because the logistics are allowing us to do the thing we love, but we're going to have to, that's the sacrifice. So, and I think that's, again, why a lot of people don't stick to following a career in what they're passionate about, because as soon as you try and do it, you realize, well, hang on, it's not that much fun every day. It's not going to be. It's not meant to be. It can't be, but it'll get more fun the more success you have. But then it's that paradox of not letting that make you project, because then you'll probably not get there. So it's like, I think a lot of it comes back to just, how do you just stay present, be mindful, be so, honest with yourself. And this is, an all day, it's an exhausting process. It's like, you're having to reel yourself back in. For me, I'm having to reel myself back in sometimes 50 times a day. It'll be, okay, Nick, come back to reality. Okay, come back. Okay, go to the gym, go let off some steam, come back and do it later. And, it's just like a never ending thing. But like anything, the more you do it, the better you get at managing this stuff.
You do. And I mean, for me, I hope everybody listening takes something from that, because for me, that was a really good reminder, man. Like, it is, because especially when you turn something into a profession, it's when you're way back and you're daydreaming about it. Like, I can think back to me at 2016, just learning about public speaking and becoming an author and all of these people that I admired, and I would just listen to their podcasts for hours on end. And I remember there was like 2 or 3 years where I wouldn't recommend this for anybody, for the record. It was just where I was at in my life. I think I read like 150 just across 3 years, but I was just tearing through books.
Yeah.
And I was just loving it. I was getting flooded with all these new ideas, and that you can change the way that you think and your belief systems. And I was just and I was experiencing the onset of a brain disorder, and I was navigating that. So it was a confusing but exciting and interesting time. Some very dark moments, but from the 30,000 foot view, it's like, oh, you show up and you speak on stage, or, oh, you just show up and you do the podcast episode and you go about your life. What an idyllic situation. And it isn't like that, to your point. And I think for people listening, whether you're the 20 something that's hungry to start their thing, like, I'm not saying don't do it. You totally should pursue your passions. But I think it is so important what you're talking about in terms of what you're talking about is thought management, belief management, and just bringing yourself back to the present, bringing yourself back to what you're doing. And I also think a big part of it is detachment. Like, anytime I'm attached to that, I need to have a certain outcome, I steal the joy away from the situation. One tangible example is, I remember when I first started this podcast, I needed every episode to go perfectly. Like, I just had to have every question, and the conversation needed to flow perfectly to the outcome for the listener. And I was stealing the joy away from the one part of this whole thing that I like the most, which is meeting cool people and having these conversations. And I was just literally, I just like one way to detach, to just give somebody an example, is like, rather than needing everything to go perfectly, I just said, I'm going to prepare to the best of my ability. I'm going to show up with some questions that I think are interesting and could be helpful to other people. And outside of that, the conversation is just going to flow based on how I'm feeling. Maybe even tapping into a little bit of that intuition you were talking about earlier. And however the conversation goes, what does perfect even look like? I can't control that. And I just need to let go of it. So I identified this unhelpful belief system and then worked to reframe it to create another belief system that just made the process more enjoyable. Because sometimes I think we can steal the joy away from the process of something that we would enjoy, but there's this belief system behind it that is making it somewhat, I don't want to say miserable, but just not as fun as it could be.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And there's no such thing as perfect anyway. And, we hinder creativity. And I've had to go back and forth on this so many times because I'm naturally, a perfectionist and try and overanalyze things. And I'm trying to get better at, even most of my interviews, I'll maybe spend 15 minutes researching the person, bit longer if I need to know more information, and that's it. I don't even have notes anymore, and I just like to see what happens. But I think that came with probably doing a bit more groundwork at the beginning, but not needing to. Even now, getting back into acting, that's why I did improv class. It's like teaching you to prepare, but often the most creativity is going to come from not thinking, from allowing yourself, if we do an interview, being so present that we don't even know what we're going to say next, and we're letting what's organic and natural come out. I think that's what listeners will connect with. So really just not attaching to it. Obviously not going in blind, and, if there's preparation you need to do, of course, but then just detaching from the whole thing. And I think, again, I keep using acting as an analogy, but it's like what you have to do. You learn a script, you have to understand what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have to just forget everything, try and pretend you go in there and not know what the hell's going to happen. And if you do try and plan it, it's going to be bad acting, because you're going to be like, okay, hey, when I say this word, I've got to get angry and I've got to do this. Well, if it's pre-planned, it's not organic, it's not real. It's like you can't create, you can't, let something become its own thing. So I think that's a really good point. And then the other point with the process sort of thing is, I think the way I started looking at it was to get the outcome of being able to do more of the thing that I love. It's going to require probably 95% of crap that I don't enjoy, all these logistical things, hustling, etc. And then, the fun part is when I actually get to do the interview, get to go on the stage, get to do the acting job. So how do I get myself to commit more to doing it? And I started to try and just break it down and look at it. Every email I send, every message I send on Instagram, every conversation I have about, either my business or podcast or, the TV show I'm trying to make at the moment, every single thing I do is edging me one step closer to what I want. So would I rather send that extra email to do that extra thing or not? Because if I do it, it's actually getting me closer to being able to do more of the thing I love. So really just drilling that into my head of, and it really helped. It meant that, I just look at it differently rather than being a chore. It's every time I do it, every time I fail, everything that I put out there is just getting me that one step closer. And I think that simple change in thinking about it really can make a big difference.
It can. It definitely can. Those little shifts are so helpful. And I know that you have a hard stop here, so I want to be respectful of your time. But I totally agree with you, man. I think that this was really valuable to dive into talking about the process a little bit more and giving people little ideas and mindset shifts that they can make. Because even when you were talking about preparing for a podcast, like that was the thing, a rule that I set for myself is like, I have 30 minutes to prepare questions.
Yeah.
And that's it. At the end of the 30 minutes, that's it. Like that's the amount of time that you have, because if it's up to me, I could sit there stressing myself out over having the perfect set of questions for 2 hours. And for what? Like
it's like, and the thing is, like, if you think about this conversation we've just had, if this got deleted and lost and we tried to recreate it, we can't. It'll be different. If we did it again tomorrow, will it be better or worse? Who knows? Maybe it'll be shit. Maybe it won't, or maybe it'll be even better. Or it's just, there's no right or wrong or better or worse. It's like, this is in this moment, with where we're both at in our lives, with on this very day, the mood that we're in, with the knowledge that we both have, this interview's gone in a certain way. That could be very different tomorrow. And it's not better or worse. It's just what it is. And you do enough of them, there's going to be good ones. There's going to be ones that aren't as good. There's going to be ones that connect with people, but that's only going to happen if you have that mindset of just allowing things to, be what they are. So I think it's just a good way to think about things when it comes to this stuff.
You're so right. You're so right. And that gets back to that detachment, which we got to touch on too. So I know you got to jump here. Let me ask you two things. Number one, where can people find you and stay connected?
So they can go to my website, which is nickbracks.com. On there, it's got links to my book, my community for Move Your Mind podcast. I've also got a site for the business and the community, which is moveyourmind.me, or you can just find me on Instagram, Nick Bracks, TikTok, Nick Bracks Official, any of those sort of ones if you want to see, stupid little skits that I make and things like that.
I like the skits. I watch them, man. They're funny. Yeah, they're good.
We should make one together.
Yeah. Next time I'm in New York or something, we should, because you're still in New York. Well, I guess you go back and forth between New York and Australia, but yeah. Next time I'm in New York, we should make one. That'd be awesome.
For sure.
So I guess to wrap things up, Nick, could you give my audience one piece of advice that you wish that you would have heard back then to get started on your mental health journey?
There's so many, but probably if it boiled down, I'd just say that you are enough. You're enough as you are. No matter what you do, you already got the thing, that you need. You're enough right now, and you don't have anything to prove. So go and just, be yourself, learn, do what you want to do, but realize that you don't need to compensate for anything. No external thing is going to change that. You're already enough. That's what I'd say.
I love that. That was the theme of my wife and I's yoga class yesterday. So
nice.
It seems that life is sending me, maybe me personally, a message, maybe my audience, but yes, totally.
Synchronicity.
Yes, totally. Oh man, that is awesome. You're enough as you are, and you don't need to seek any outside validation. So I appreciate you so much, Nick, for coming on the show, and definitely going to have many, many more conversations in the future. And I definitely look forward to those.
Mate, same to you, and look forward to having you on my podcast as well. And love what you're doing. Honestly, just love nothing more than connecting with people like you, because I think we could probably talk for, 10 hours about all of this stuff. And I love the fact that, you've gone on this journey, you're putting yourself out there, you're getting these positive messages, you're having these conversations. I think it's one of the most important things that, that we can do. And I think it's, really amazing that you're doing it. So, I think keep doing what you're doing.
And same to you, man. It's fun to be on this journey with like-minded people. It really is. So I appreciate that so much.
I appreciate it, mate. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Nick. Okay.